Welcome to Wednesday night. Here in the Northeast, a lot of rain that we desperately needed. So that's good. Anywhere else in the country, I salute you. It is not raining as much as it is here. But we're going to jump back into Daniel, and I'm excited to do so. We're skipping chapter 6 because we did that pretty thoroughly on Sunday mornings. And we're going straight to chapter 7. So things are about to get weird in the book of Daniel. So let me read you a couple quotes from scholars concerning the text that we're about to read. One says, modern commentators agree that Daniel chapter 7 is the single most important chapter in the book of Daniel. Another author said, it would be no exaggeration to say that this chapter is one of the most important passages in the Old Testament. Period. And one says Daniel chapter 7 is the most comprehensive and detailed prophecy of future events to be found anywhere in the Old Testament. And you may hear that if you have any familiarity with the Bible and the book of Daniel. You might be thinking, prophecy? Wait a minute. We've been talking about Daniel and the boys, believers in God who survive and thrive in Babylon. What do you mean prophecy? Well, we're at a major and fascinating pivot point in the book of Daniel. We're going to see it in verse 1 of chapter 7, which says, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions as he lay in his bed. Then he wrote down the dream and told the sum of the matter. If you've been following along with us on Sundays or on Wednesdays, you might say, Belshazzar, king of Babylon, isn't he dead? I thought he saw the writing on the wall, soiled himself, and died. Like, what are we doing here? Didn't Babylon get replaced by Persia? Very true. What we have in Daniel chapter 7 is a flashback to an earlier day in Daniel's life. Daniel had this dream during the first year of King Belshazzar. So this is long before the handwriting on the wall of chapter 5, long before Daniel in the lion's den of chapter 6, where Daniel was probably in his 80s. Right now, this is Daniel in his spry early 60s. So we're going backwards. Why structure the book that way? Because this is the major break in the book. There are a couple ways to divide up Daniel, but one way is just to cut it in half. First 6 chapters are history, stories of these men of faith and courage as they navigate Babylon. And now in chapter 7 through the rest of the book, we have prophecies, visions given by God to Daniel to reveal to him the future. So we're going back in Daniel's life to get a preview of future events. We're going back to the future. Got it? And it sounds kind of crazy because Daniel's switching genres mid-book. He's going to go from history to prophecy. He's switching styles like an MMA fighter who goes from stand-up to ground game, or Post Malone, who went from rap to country. It's a bit disorienting at first, but it makes sense if you think about it. This prophetic section is called apocalyptic literature. The word apocalypsis in Greek means to uncover or reveal. It's where we get the title of Revelation, the final book in our Bible. Here, God's going to pull back the curtain and let Daniel see through the corridors of history to the end of time. And apocalyptic literature is scary and bizarre, but not like these dystopian movies that are meant to just make you feel a sense of dread by showing you impending doom and suffering. These kind of passages are written to people in the midst of crisis, instability, politically, and unrest. And it's meant to give them perspective and give them hope so that they can endure. So I think it fits our day right now. It's fascinating to think that Daniel's in the first year of King Belshazzar. Belshazzar was a wicked king that came into power through conspiracy and murder and will ultimately lead his kingdom to its destruction in the end. So Daniel's in the midst of a major moment of political instability in the life of Babylon. And it's interesting when God comes to Daniel in year 1, he doesn't talk about Belshazzar at all. He's like, no. I want you to focus your eyes, Daniel, 500 years into the future. If you ask, why is God doing that? Because prophecy will give Daniel perspective about the present. It lets him put the present moment in context. It would be like if you desperately wanted me to tell you what God wants for you this week. And I said to you, God has revealed to me this story about your grandkids. You might be disappointed, but then you might think, hey, wait a second. Grandkids means I lived long enough to have kids, and they lived long enough to have kids. So there's a perspective that you get from prophecy about the present. But the genre changes. The theme is the same. that God is in control of the nations, even when sometimes it feels like he's not. And one day his kingdom will come and his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. But one other preliminary note on how we talk about Daniel. Daniel's also written in two different languages. The first chapter is in Hebrew, the language of the Jewish people, and then Hebrew resumes in chapters 8 through the end. Chapters 2 through 7 are written in Aramaic, the language of the Babylonian, the person who doesn't know God, the people who were ruling over the nation of Israel. And the idea is most commentators agree that Daniel is speaking this so the world may know. And this Aramaic section that we're in is actually written in a chiasm, which is an interesting kind of parallelism in Hebrew literature. Some of you may have felt that when you're reading through it, but you didn't quite understand it. The idea is there are parallels at the top and the bottom, and they kind of come down to a narrow point that gives you the point of the whole book. So in chapter 2, where the Aramaic began, Nebuchadnezzar the king gets a prophecy from God of a statue of descending different types of metal. And it shows him the history of the fate of the nations and empires. In chapter 7, Daniel will get a vision of 4 beasts that will match the 4 emblems in that statue. And Daniel will see the kingdoms of man and the ultimate triumph of the kingdom of God. And then in chapter 3 and 6, you get the story of the fiery furnace and the lion's den. Both stories give a picture of the believer who may suffer under unjust rule, but God preserves his remnant. Then it narrows down to chapters 4 and 5, where both are about God humbling arrogant kings. Chapter 4 was the humbling of King Nebuchadnezzar, and he repents, and God forgives him. Chapter 5 is Belshazzar being humbled, but he refuses to repent and receives judgment. All that narrows down to the point that's repeated to these 2 kings. Heaven rules over the fates of mankind. That's the point. But where we are now is at the end of the chiasm, the mirroring of chapter 2. So the fate of the nations as humanity rules the earth, and God will show his perspective on the present. This is arguably one of the most important passages, not just in your Old Testament, but in the entire Bible. This is what all apocalyptic literature is based upon. Revelation is actually a commentary on the book of Daniel, particularly Daniel chapter 7. Quoting this passage is what got Jesus killed, Daniel 7. And the vision begins in verse 2. Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. So it begins with a turbulent scene. Daniel sees wind coming from every direction, and it's churning up the sea. It's a scene of agitation and unrest. In the ancient world, the sea was a picture of chaos because it was outside of human control. Chaotic water plays a big role in ancient creation myths. It's interesting, Abraham Lincoln, on the eve of major events during the Civil War, had a recurring dream that he'd be out on the sea in some fast-moving vessel, and the idea for him was, I'm out in the midst of turbulent seas, and I'm rushing into events I cannot control. But in the midst of this, Daniel feels this chaos. It feels powerful and dangerous, and then it gets weirder, because amidst the chaos in verse 3, 4 great beasts come up out of the sea that were different from one another. Now, to tip the cards a little bit, in verse 17, Daniel will hear from an angel that these 4 beasts symbolize 4 kings and 4 kingdoms that will rise and rule in the earth. As mentioned, this parallels Daniel chapter 2. Although in Daniel chapter 2, the Babylonian king pictures the different nations of humanity as a great statue made from different kinds of metal. When the believer, Daniel, gets a vision about the nations, it's not a glorious statue, it's beasts. And not just beasts, they're a twisting of the animals that God has made. There's something disturbing about them. Why a beast? Because it's violence without conscience. This will not feel safe. It's like things are not as they should be. All right, the first 3 beasts are in verses 4 through 6. The first was like a lion that had eagle's wings. Incidentally, you can go online and see some very crazy artist depictions of these beasts, but try to picture it in your mind. First was a lion, had eagle's wings, and then I looked, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and the mind of a man was given to it. And behold, another beast, the second one like a bear, was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, arise, devour much flesh. After this I looked, and behold, another like a leopard with 4 wings of a bird on its back, and the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Again, apocalyptic literature has strange symbolism, but these are depictions. We're told later of kings and a kingdom of each that will succeed the other. And the first king is like a lion, but has wings of an eagle. Most commentators, I think probably all commentators, understand that this is the kingdom Daniel's in at the time he gets the dream. This is a vision of what was the golden head of the statue. This is Babylon. Why do they think that? A couple of reasons. Number one, Nebuchadnezzar, the great king of Babylon, is symbolized throughout the Old Testament as both a lion and an eagle, mostly by Jeremiah, a contemporary of Daniel. Also in Babylon, the winged lion was their symbol, and it was all throughout the kingdom. And what happens to this beast is the same language of what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. God humbled him. God gave him the mind of a beast. He went crazy. His hair grew, saying that it looked like the wings of a bird. But then he repented, acknowledged that God rules, and he stood up on his hind feet and was given back the mind and heart of a man. So all commentators say, hey, this first beast is a picture of Nebuchadnezzar, the great king, and of Babylon. Second beast, like a bear, but raised up on one side. Historically, what does that mean? Most believe that this is the empire that will replace the Babylonian Empire, the one we saw Daniel enter in the last chapter, chapter 5. This is the empire of the Medo-Persians. A bear was a good symbol because bears are huge, and so was the Medo-Persian Empire. Raised up on one side, maybe one side was bigger than the other, raised up to strike. Many people believe that this is a picture of the fact that Medo-Persian Empire had two sides. The Medes and the Persians formed an alliance, but the Persians gained dominance. That's why one side is bigger than the other. It gets more specific than that in the next chapter. The same kingdom is named the Medo-Persian Empire. It's pictured as a goat or a ram with two horns, and one is bigger than the other. So most people say that's probably what this is. The three ribs in the mouth are probably the great empires that it destroyed. They famously took out not only the Babylonians, but Egypt and Lydia, I believe. By devouring much flesh, the Persian domination went from Egypt to India. It was the largest empire the world had known at that time. So most people see in the bear Medo-Persia. The third one, leopard, meaning the next sequence in empires. Most people look at that and think, hey, a leopard is something fast. What came after the Medo-Persians that conquered with speed, like a leopard with wings? That was Greece. Many people look at this and say, hey, this is exactly what Alexander the Great did. Alexander the Great did something so great, he's called the Great. In 10 years, he conquered the entire known world at that time, in less than a decade before he turned age 32. And then he wept, for there were no more worlds to conquer. And so many think that the leopard with wings means he'll conquer with speed, and the four heads could mean that he conquered in four directions, or it could mean what we know from history, that when Alexander died, he had no successor, so his kingdom was split between his four generals. So some people, when they see a four-headed leopard, think maybe that's the way this kingdom will go. So all scholars believe that these four beasts, and we've covered the first three, represent four kingdoms. That's what an angel will say later. There's a bit of disagreement on what I just said about which one is which. So traditionally, for centuries, the Christian church has said this is a picture of Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece. Fairly recently, there's been some scholars that say, no, this is Babylon, the Medes, the Persians, and then Greece will be the fourth that we haven't covered yet. A lot of that idea is built off the assumption that there's no way Daniel could have known any of this, that he just looked 400 or 500 years through history. This would be like you or I standing here in 2026 telling us about 2426. It sounds even weird to say it, right? We haven't even figured out how to say 2426 yet. You're trying to figure out what's going to happen on Tuesday. So you look at us and go, there's no way we could do that. But as Christians, we say, yeah, there's a way. There's a character that keeps showing up in the book of Daniel called God, and he knows things. And so we think that's what he's doing here. Daniel has just looked through what we know as history, but he's looked hundreds of years into the future. And he's looking at the succession of nations. And notice, this doesn't go from glory to glory to glory. They go from terror to terror to terror. And in verse 7, we get something even more disturbing. It said, after this, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, terrifying, dreadful, exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it. It had 10 horns, and I considered the horns, and behold, there came up from them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. Now notice, it doesn't say that this beast is like anything. This beast is different because he's different. He defies zoological categories, and he's different in the terror that he inspires. He's dreadful. He's different in the havoc that he wreaks. Not only does he devour, he breaks and stamps out what's left. And he's different in his power. It's got iron teeth and later bronze claws. It's like this robo beast that's technologically advanced and different in its ruler. It's got a little horn that has the eyes of a man. Many believe that symbolizes intelligence. It has a mouth that speaks big things. That's a symbol of arrogance. This thing gets a little horn that starts talking. Weird. That wasn't in the statue. This little crazy horn that was talking. Traditionally, Christians have looked at this and said that the iron teeth of the beast match the iron legs of the statues. That went from the head of gold Babylon to the arms of Medo-Persia to the belly of bronze Greece. This is the iron legs, the iron teeth, the Iron Legion of Rome. And that kind of makes sense. But then you get to these 10 horns, and it's like, well, what's that about? We'll find out later in the text. It's 10 kings, and 3 of the kings are uprooted by this little horn who takes over in his dominance, his intelligence, his arrogance. That's new. We didn't hear anything about that earlier. But he will gain ascendance in a violent way, like Hitler or Stalin. Like, this is a different kind of guy. We'll get into what this means, but I just want to point out again, as you zoom the lens back, this is not Daniel seeing humanity getting better and better and better in every way that he sees. As the nations continue, there's violence, there's devouring, and if you look at human history, we read our songs about love and peace, but the history of the nations is much about violence and war. H.G. Wells, in one of the most optimistic times in American history, as he looked at all the technological advancements of the 1930s, wrote this. He said, "Can we doubt that presently our race will more than realize our boldest imaginations, and we will achieve unity and peace?" And then after World War II, he wrote a little tract called "The Mind at the End of Its Tether." And the same man wrote, "The cold-blooded massacres of the defenseless, the return of deliberate and organized torture has come near to breaking my spirit altogether. Homo sapiens, as he's been pleased to call himself, is played out." So he sees we've advanced technologically, but there's a violence to us, and it's dangerous. So this is a disturbing scene. But something fascinating will occur in the midst of the chaos. And that comes in verse 9, where the Ancient of Days comes on the scene. That's the hopeful part for us as Christ followers. And it's really the cool part because it just reinforces the fact that God is in control of everything. Hope this was helpful for you. These are chapters that oftentimes we just gloss over or just skip altogether. We're like, start reading about beasts, and we're like, God, I just trust you. This has nothing to do with me. But there are some real things about prophecy and some really cool things about this chapter. Just think again, Daniel was prophesying hundreds of years into the future what was going to happen. And Jesus quoted this chapter, which is a big deal. All right, we will finish this up next week. Hope you have a good rest of your week, a good night, and we'll talk to you soon.